Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm super excited to have David G on, but welcome to our channel where we talk about healing and transformations. David is a world-renowned meditation teacher. He's on the Insight Timer app, which is the largest database of free meditation that's available. And David is one of the first people that you're going to find if you tune into that app. He's also a best-selling author and just seems like a very warm, wonderful guy. And I'm so excited to have and blessed to have him on. David, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm excited to talk about meditation, which is my favorite thing to be talking about. So thank you so much.
Thank you. My first question that I had in my mind being able to speak to you, David, was how did you originally get into the journey of healing in meditation? What year was that for some context? And what originally drew you into meditation and healing specifically?
Well, I began meditating in college. It was an experimental Asian studies course, so we were also reading the Bhagavad Gita and Alan Watts and Suzuki and the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. So we were like getting that information, and we were being taught, um, in addition, how to meditate. There were 12 of us in the class. We sat in a circle. Um, our Zen master stood in the corner. We would meditate, and we were instructed that when we had a thought, we would raise our hand. When our Zen master saw our hand go up, he would come over. In his hand, he carried an 18-inch bamboo stick known as a keisaku, and he would thwack us on the back. So, so I only lasted in that school of meditation a couple of weeks, and but I loved the way it made me feel when I wasn't meditating. And that was really the biggest, aha moment for me, that sometimes the meditation itself is not necessarily like the bliss thing. What we're really doing is cultivating something deeper so we can feel like that in waking state when our eyes are open, when we're walking through the world. And that has continued to be a consistent thread, because a lot of people, uh, they'll meditate, or they'll use an app, or they'll use themselves or a gong or whatever, and then they'll say, "Ah, well, that wasn't so great, I still had thoughts, or I still had turbulence." It's like, okay, we're human. We have, supposedly, according to the UCLA Neurolab, 60,000 to 80,000 thoughts a day. According to skeptic.com, we have 6,000 to 8,000. So I guess somewhere in there, yeah, there's going to be a lot of thoughts. Meditation doesn't stop them. It might even make you more aware of them. So we shouldn't necessarily run from them. Um, but the true magic and value and benefit of meditation takes place when we're back here with the rest of us and our eyes are open and we're living life. And so I left that school of meditation. I actually dropped that class, kept doing all the reading, but I couldn't handle, lying to my Zen master, because I was, if I'm having a thought, I don't really feel like being hit. So I continued on that journey for a whole bunch of years, sometimes, doing mantra techniques and mindfulness techniques and tantra and chocolate tasting meditation, still one of my favorites, Vipassana, retreats, all that kind of stuff. And then I got more deeply involved in the corporate world, and I got, deeper and deeper and deeper into working in the world of finance. And um, I noticed that I had traded in my early morning meditation practice for an early morning train ride to the World Trade Center. I traded in my evening practice for a glass of scotch. And like that, I wasn't meditating anymore. And I realized also balance was gone in my life. And so I was feeling pretty empty. I was feeling pretty unfulfilled in the work that I was doing. And in the wake of 9/11, um, I found myself walking past a row of cardboard boxes that people were living in, And as I walked past this one particular box, a hand reached out, grabbed me, grabbed my pant leg and like pulled me in, and this face with these blue crystalline eyes suddenly gazed into mine and said, "What's going to be on your tombstone?" And I call these like butterfly moments. It seemed like, you know, everyone was gone. The cars were gone, the traffic was gone, the people were gone. Like there's nothing even existing other than me and this guy. And we were in this like timeless gaze, this lock of energy. And it seemed like it was for hours. It was probably a couple of minutes. And when he ultimately like released me, I continued to walk and suddenly realized that tears were streaming down my face, that my knees had gotten weak, that I was hyperventilating and I couldn't even stand. So I walked like 20 feet, sat down on the steps of an apartment building right at the end of that row, and really started asking myself really deep questions. What is going to be on my tombstone? Why am I here? What's going on in my life? And so I'd heard that Deepak Chopra at the time was supposed to teach at this retreat in Oxford, England. And so, and I really wasn't familiar with Deepak Chopra, but the name of the experience was called Seduction of Spirit. And I was like, wow, that's maybe that's what I need to do, because I'm so empty and so, so deeply in pain. I'm not finding fulfillment here. I'm so sad. I was still attempting to process all the death and loss that that went on around me during 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And so I quit my job and headed off to Oxford, England, to hang out at that meditation retreat. There was supposed to be a couple of thousand people there, but because no one was flying at that time, sort of like when the pandemic first started,
Right.
so everyone knows what that was when everything suddenly locked down. That happened, 20 years ago as well.
Mhm.
And I got there and there were 50 people. And so meditated every day, practiced all these different things, reconnected to a mantra practice. And every day that I was meditating for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, suddenly I felt that my heart began healing, and that it was like my heart was this had been like this white linen cloth that had been like immersed in such, black India ink that I was so sad. I was so empty. I was in such sorrow. We've probably all been there at some point in our lives. It was just an emptiness, really, more so than anything else. But after meditating for 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row, it was like that cloth had been draped through this rushing stream and getting cleansed and getting lighter. And suddenly, for maybe the first time in 20 years, I experienced joy. And I was like, oh my God, joy. Where's that emotion gone? I didn't have that. I didn't have that sense for like decades. And so at the end of that experience, I was so inspired. I like headed off on my own little eat, pray, love journey without the eating and the love, just a lot of prayer, in search of the guru. So I
Mhm.
got a 6-month visa, headed off to India, and traveled around India, went into the Himalayas, and was praying and meditating, went down, bathing in the Ganges and practicing yoga, visiting temples, traveling all throughout India, north and south and both coasts, and really just like fully surrendering in search of the guru. And then I'm at the end of these 6 months, it was like 5 months and 28 days. I'm laying in a hammock in a cashew forest in Kerala, southern India, with all these parrots chirping around and squawking. And I'm reading the Bhagavad Gita, this ancient text that I had read when I was in college.
Mhm.
And I'm suddenly reading chapter 2, verse 48, which is where, Arjuna, the great warrior, is talking. This is original conversations with God. This was written around 300 BC. And so I'm reading this, and I'd read this hundreds of times, but suddenly I read chapter 2, verse 48, um, where Arjuna says to God, like, how am I supposed to live my life? How am I supposed to walk through the world? How am I supposed to make my decisions? Teach me, what's the essence? And Krishna, God, replies to him, Yogastha kuru karmani. Yogastha, establish yourself in the present moment. Kuru karmani, then perform action. Essentially, get still and then bring it. Get still and then be brilliant. And that hit me like a lightning bolt. That was like such an aha moment. And I, you know, raced home. Well, racing, I raced to the bus station, you know, a day and a half later, a bus arrived. And that took 3 days to get to Mumbai. And then I waited at Mumbai airport for another 2 days. And then my flight took a day. So racing is all relative. But I raced home back to New York and just began meditating every single day at home. And I was feeling so, so good. Felt really so great. And after a few weeks, a couple of friends of mine came over to my house for an intervention. And they were like, dude, all you do is sit around and meditate. And I was like, I know. Isn't that amazing? It's so great. And they were like, it's a little dysfunctional. And, that whole yoga sta kuru karmani thing, you said that blew you away. You're only doing the yoga sta. What about the kuru karmani? You know, um, you should teach other people to meditate or something along those lines. And I was like, oh, come on, I'm from New York. I don't care about anybody else's meditation. And they said, okay, forget the altruism. If you really want to learn something, learn it from the inside out. Learn to teach it. And they said, your buddy Deepak, he has a center out in California. You should go to like one of his events or get certified or do something like that. I'm fairly obedient. Headed out to California, went to this workshop, which was like you know, the second component of becoming a certified meditation teacher through that process. I'd been, that first event that I went to was actually a component to get certified as a teacher. So I went to the second one. Again, there were only 30 people at this. And I'm like, I don't get it. There should be thousands of people here. And at that event, he asked me to run the center. We all got up and told what we had been doing and prior to getting there or in past lives and whatever. And I said, oh, I help turn companies around. I could definitely make it so that there's not 30 people here, but there's 500. And he was like, okay, well, why don't you become the COO? And I was like, done. Um, I said, but I really came here to get certified as a meditation teacher. He said, oh, well, that'll continue. Um, so I went on that path, started, when the workshop ended, I never went back home. For 6 months. Ultimately, I flew back home, get my car, and and get all my stuff. But prior to that, I just stayed there, and every day led that process, got certified, became the lead educator of the Chopra Center. Ultimately, I became the dean of Chopra Center University. Got to teach meditation every single day. Got to travel the world with Deepak and his partner, Dr. David Simon, a neurologist who became my best friend, and that was just like amazing. Deepak was an endocrinologist, David Simon, a neurologist, and to have these two MDs coming at me with science and spirituality simultaneously was so powerful, so deep. And that just allowed me to really immerse myself in the teachings, in the mechanics, in the science, and people were coming every single day and every single week to all these events, and I got to train them and teach them and find out what worked, find out what didn't, find out why their practice stopped, find out what it really was most helpful with, what were the best practices, what were the worst practices, because I was like on the ground teaching them and talking to them every single day for a decade. And then in 2012, David Simon, that's the cosmic joke, David Simon, neurologist dedicated to healing, diagnosed with a brain tumor, terminal
Oh, wow.
brain cancer, diagnosed with glioblastoma multiform, which if you look it up, it's, 14 months is your lifespan from date of diagnosis. And he passed in January of 2012, and I figured, you know what? Let me get out there and really share this in places. Let me teach in hospice, let me teach in schools, let me teach in hospitals, let me teach cops, let me teach the military, and I just began traveling the world. I got the chance to teach the Dutch Special Forces and NATO and the Dublin gang unit, and I'm here in Southern California. Right up the road is Camp Pendleton. I got the chance to work with Marines for a year.
Wow.
Um, so I really got to work with Facebook and AT&T and T and Pepsi and all these different companies that that were not at the time really open to it. Got to train people at Bank America, um, and so that's what I do. That's what I've dedicated my life to, teaching people. I'd mentioned before we got on, I'm in a teacher training right now. I train people, I certify them to teach meditation. Some people don't even really want to teach it. They just want to learn all those deep details, which was my original calling. I wasn't looking to share this with anyone. I just wanted to really learn it from the depths so I could really lock down my practice. And once I started really getting deep into it, I couldn't stop sharing. So for the past decade, it's been 10 years now, I've been, creating my own path. I've started recording meditations in 2010, started sending them out every weekend since 2011. I've recorded I'm up to about 1,700 guided meditations now on
Wow.
every platform.
Wow.
So whether it's Apple Music or Spotify or Insight Timer or Tidal, whatever, you know, um, that's what I've done. And it's just given me the opportunity to meet so many people and connect to so many people and work with so many people on so many different levels in so many different ways. Um, I've spent the last several years working with a lot of police departments because heaven knows these are individuals who could definitely benefit
Hmm.
from the ability to learn to take a breath, to de-escalate, and to really be better witnesses, you know, up their witnessing awareness and take care of themselves. I mean, how could you live in hypervigilance every single day
On the other side of that,
for 20, 30 years?
on the other side of that, have you worked with any prisoners or inmates?
I have. Um, I worked up in the Los Angeles prison system for a bunch of years as well. And then I started working with this organization. We're actually celebrating 10 years right now, called Blue Courage. And they are on a quest, it's former and current police officers on a quest to restore the nobility of policing.
Hmm.
So they teach leadership and they teach diversity, and that we have these obvious internal biases which certainly influence a lot of our decision making. What I teach for them is mindful performance, and I've taught all the cops who are in that group and had got to teach in Louisville, Kentucky, the land of the Breonna Taylor conversation. Taught a
Hmm.
lot in San Francisco PD. Got the chance recently to teach DC Metro. Um, these are cops who were certainly influenced, impacted a lot by the January 6th riot. And so suddenly you realize it's a lot of different places, and Blue Courage has started in the last couple of years working with corrections officers and National Guard members. So I've gotten that opportunity to also interact. It's really powerful. I got the chance to work with San Diego Probation, which is a whole different kind of organization. So yeah, all the different pieces that make up so much of our legal system. And I've worked with a lot of lawyers as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, teaching in the prisons has been a very, very intense process, and teaching cops as well.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'm sitting in a room with cops who've been mandated to be there, but all the work that I do with the San Francisco Police Department, which now is like in its seventh year, they have to apply. to attend these programs. So these are people who like really want to bring mindful performance into their lives,
Yeah.
and the success stories are are crazy. With people, suicides are down, in that, in those groups, and blood pressure is down for those people. And I think, obviously it can't be quantified necessarily, but happiness quotients are up. And I
Mhm.
think that, that's not exclusive to, that's available to all of us.
Absolutely. That's a truly remarkable story, and it's what a journey it was for you. It's almost like you were called to doing this. You were called, and when you saw that gentleman and you had that moment of presence with him, like time slowed down, and that's a very remarkable story. And um I kind of wanted to dive into the neuroscience, because the neuroscience is what helped me discover meditation. It was, okay, you have these 60,000, 70,000 thoughts a day, but there's something you can do about that monkey mind. And so when I just learned a little bit more about the brain, everything started to change. And um, I guess specifically, I don't feel that we know much about the heart at this point in neuroscience, because neuroplasticity is not just our mind, it's our nervous system too. So I wanted to know what you know about the heart, and um, are there studies going on right now about how the heart interacts?
Yeah, there's some really great studies, and those studies on the heart are older than the studies on the brain. The first brain studies that we saw really were in like 2012. That was, the very, very first meditation brain study was a 2012 landmark study. Dr. Sarah Lazar, this was a University of Massachusetts, Mass General merging, and Dr. Sarah Lazar, who works with those organizations and also has a foot in Harvard Medical Center, was able to bring like the whole Harvard credibility component into that. And once Yale saw what was going on, they also, got in there to help finance that particular study. It was a small study, but it was the first study that actually showed that meditation can change the physical structure of the brain. And so that was, 16 test subjects, 8 weeks, that's 56 days. They all were instructed to meditate, just watching their breath once a day for 30 minutes a day. Um, they all had MRIs done before, during, and after these 56 days. And at the end of the 8 weeks, all 16 test subjects. Now, let me just put this in context. We have two really core primitive parts of our brain, but they run a lot of the show. The amygdala, which
Mhm.
is our fear center, our anger center. Um, it's our fight flight center. Um, and it's like our safety center, and
Mhm.
our hippocampus, which is our memory, learning, spatial orientation. Now, your hippocampus like peaks around 25 years old.
Hmm.
So the gray matter in the hippocampus after 25 actually begins to shrink. So
Uh,
learning, memory, spatial orientation, that's happening at like 25. Now, of course, the shrinkage at 26, 27, 28, 30s, not so big. But, fast forward to someone who's in their 60s, there's a lot of shrinkage that's gone on there, which is why they have, the phrase senior moments, or people
right.
become more forgetful or not as great learners as they grow older. So we know that the gray matter of the hippocampus is shrinking. So let's go back to this study. They do this study for 56 days, and unanimously, all 16 test subjects show that there was a shrinkage in the gray matter of the amygdala
Hmm.
by more than 5% of all 16 test subjects. So just a little less angry, a little less fearful, a little less reactive. it also simultaneously showed an increase in the gray matter of at least 5% in every test subject. Now, this is in gray matter that's supposed to be shrinking in all of us. And
Mm-hmm.
these 16 test subjects over a period of 8 weeks actually increased the gray matter by more than 5%. And so in that moment, we've proven meditation can change the physical structure of the brain, but the parts of the brain that it can actually impact, it can slow memory loss. It can, in this instance, it increased memory.
Absolutely.
It can increase learning. It can increase hand-eye coordination or spatial orientation. So old people who like are, when people get old, they often fall and they break their hip.
Uh-huh.
Well, imagine if you had like better awareness just by meditating. Fewer people are going to like fall and break their hips, or, I mean, but
Absolutely.
suddenly like that's, amazing. Now, the studies that people have done, regarding the heart, is that there's a direct correlation to heartbeat and awareness.
Hmm.
And, there have been studies, some of the earliest studies were actually done in the military because, when people are under fire or suddenly there's like bombs going off, when people in war zones, the heart is racing at like 120 beats a minute. In an environment like that, you can't use your fine motor skills. So that relationship between the heart and our motor skills, our ability to actually like show up and do something. So a perfect example is not necessarily you or me, but women. Um, women have like, if they're carrying around a giant purse, I don't know how it's done. It's a special women's skill, or people
Mm-hmm.
who carry purses skill, I should say. But they can like get to their front door and like pop their hand into a purse that has like 700 items in it, and they just like pull out their key, slide it in the lock, and open the door. And open the door. Um, Add to that a little bit of stress. Add to that moving the heart from its typical range of 65 to 75, which is our typical range.
Mhm.
Bump that up to 75 to 85, and suddenly not so easy to find those keys in there. 85 to 95, once you find the keys, almost impossible to get them in the lock.
Mm.
Those fine motor skills, can't thread a needle when your heart's racing at,
Right.
at that. And so the reason these studies happen in the military and in law enforcement is because these people, they can't reload, even if it's just putting a clip in. If your heart's racing at 120, you're
Mhm.
just fumbling around. So think about, us. We're not in the military. We're not, we're not in law enforcement.
Right.
But we drive home and we've just had some bad news. Suddenly, poof, our heart spikes, and we're going to have trouble getting into our door
Mm.
because our heart is racing. We're going to have trouble, because suddenly, the military study said at like 120 beats a minute, you can only carry a bayonet and run. You can't even aim and fire on anything. Um, and so certainly, how about us, being nuanced with our own emotions? How about us being able to interact with people with empathy or with emotional intelligence? How about us, being put on the spot and cognitively trying to come up with the right words or the right things to say? No, in those kind of moments, you know, really we're just living in our most primitive brain, and we don't have the skill set available um, to us. And so it's been proven that meditation, we know that meditation can slow your heart rate. We know it can slow your pulse and it can lower your blood pressure. And we know that in those spaces, your breathing is going to come down, and your breathing is the thing that influences your heart, right? Because you take the breath and then it's pumping into your heart. So they're all really connected. And so there's this conversation about like heart coherence.
Mhm.
Coherence is that sexy term that's trending now in the zeitgeist, at least with nerds like you and me, who like are really paying attention to brains. um, and so that's coherence, is when you can have your brain, your neurology your heart, and your lungs, and they're all, really like talking to each other and slowing down together. Now, obviously, we can never hit zero as long as we're alive. There needs to be a certain amount of energy in our brain. If we hit zero, we're probably dead.
That's a problem.
Um, yeah, right. So suddenly we look at situations where we know that, our thoughts are flying in at the same level that they're always going to fly in. How
Mhm.
we respond to them is going to determine then what happens, to our breathing. Right. So the first thing that happens to us when someone delivers bad news or something scary or something's whatever, our fight flight, the autonomic nervous system is specifically designed to like, okay, start breathing more shallowly and more rapidly.
Mhm.
And that's like the kickoff. So it starts with the autonomic nervous system, which is really impacting everything. That's the autonomic nervous system is like the equilibrium. And in that moment that you sense a threat to the physiology, whatever that is, someone, we've evolved over the years. It used to just be we sense a threat to the skin, I'm going to get cut or I'm going to get beaten up or something like that. We've evolved. Humans have evolved over the last
Mhm.
5,000 years. We take stuff personally now. Someone says, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're wearing that color," and
Yeah.
we're like, we're not going to punch him in the face, but we're going to get more aggressive,
Mhm.
with our languaging and with our emotions, and suddenly, so fight flight in the most traditional sense is we're either going to fight the threat or actually run away from it, and our autonomic nervous system determines that in under 5 seconds.
Mhm.
You see somebody suddenly, you're in a bad part of town or something like that, and somebody reaches into their jacket, and you're suddenly like, oh, someone's going to pull out a gun here. I spent a lot of time in bad parts of town. Um,
Sure.
other people might not think that, but so anytime you sense a threat to the physiology, all this stuff kicks in.
Mhm.
But we've evolved over the years. So let me just condense this in terms of like what kicks in. So 20,000 years ago, you're walking through the forest and you hear a twig snap, and your autonomic nervous system says, uh-oh, something's out there big enough to snap a twig. Your life is probably in danger.
That's good.
Let's
Yeah.
start let's start perspiring instantly, because your mind body, your autonomic nervous system knows you're going to have to either fight that thing or run away from that thing. You're going to overheat. The only way we know to cool ourselves down is to perspire. The next thing that happens is right after you suddenly start to perspire is you start to breathe more shallowly and more rapidly to get the blood primed
Right.
for flowing through your body. Why does your blood need to be primed to flow through your body? Because then your autonomic nervous system says, shut down everything non-essential to saving your life. Shut down your growth hormone, shut down your sex hormone, shut down your immune system. You do not need to be using those resources right now. They are actually shut down, not even just suppressed, they're turned off. And then once all non-essential features are turned off, poof, adrenaline, cortisol, and glucagon surge into you. This is all at like the 2 second mark upon you sensing the threat. And you think, okay, now I'm ready to fight or run away. It gets even more intense than that. The hard parts of your blood that run through the platelets, that run through the plasma, your platelets, they become plump and sticky. We
Mm.
actually start clotting before we get cut, because 20,000 years ago, you were probably going to get cut. No
Right.
matter what. If you ran away barefoot in the jungle, probably going to get cut. Or if you fought something that was attacking you, probably going to get cut. So imagine we're like clotting in advance, and now you're ready to like fight the threat. Fast forward 20,000 years,
Yep.
and someone attacks your politics or attacks your family member verbally, just verbally. Someone posts on Twitter something that offends you, and that same exact thing, we've evolved into emotional fight flight.
Mhm.
So someone says, like, really? You root for that team? They're a bunch of losers. And you're sensing a threat to something you think you own. We think we own our religions and our politics and our
Mhm.
music groups, and our sports teams and our hobbies and our kids. think again on that one. All the things we think we own, even when we're driving our car, we think we own the lane. Someone sort of like comes into like crosses the lane right next to us, and we're like, hey, what are you doing? Someone tailgates us, and we're ready to like start a fight. I mean, it's amazing. This
Mhm.
is all because chemically and hormonally we're being triggered by these. We're not sensing a threat to the physiology, we're sensing a threat to the ego, something we think we own.
Right.
And so we're living our life, we can get triggered. Honestly, you could just roll past somebody's house and they have a sign for a certain politician that they want elected in the next election. You can get triggered. Suddenly you could look at someone and they remind you of someone who abused you,
Mm.
30 years ago. Poof, you're triggered. It's all that emotional fight flight. There's actually a name for it. It's called the reactive response or the ego response. So this is all the stuff that's happening to us
Mhm.
as we walk throughout the day when like our needs are not met or our expectations aren't met, or someone says something that we take personally, or we suddenly reflect on, oh, I could have been better in that moment, or I can't believe I said that or did that. So like all that stuff's going on, and all those hormones and chemicals in our body are being like regulated up and down. So how in the world can you be in that state of coherence where your brain is sort of like really efficient and not working too hard, where your heart is sort of in that like 65, to 70, maybe even lower than that, beats um, per minute, and where your blood pressure is coming down and your breathing is deep and slow versus shallow and quick. So we have to, what meditation allows us to do is meditation helps us cultivate that ability to be coherent. Now, there are other practices that we can use absolutely to increase that coherence, but they are all things that we need to do without activity going on. And we live in a world of activity. We have 5 seconds. What do? We pick up our phone and scroll for 5 seconds because it's, we pull up at a red light. What do? We suddenly look around because we don't have the patience to sit for 30 seconds. We got to like do stuff. Um, and so we are pushing our heart, mind, breath coherence out of whack so consistently, so often. And that's why I really believe that the daily meditation practice, and I wrote a book, De-Stressifying, which is like in the moment stress hacks, but it also talks about like building up this daily thing. So just like brushing your teeth every single day, you don't brush them the day before you see your dentist.
Right.
You brush your teeth so they're in great shape when you show up to see your dentist. And if we can show up and meditate every single day, we're actually training those aspects of our brain to work. We're training our mind, our heart, and our breath to be working together to keep us in the most aware, in a ninja state, essentially, not being pulled out or sparked or triggered, but totally as like the silent witness who sees all and then can make a conscious choice. And it goes back to that conversation where I'm laying in the hammock, where it's like yoga sta kuru karmani. Establish yourself in the present moment and then perform action. And if we can live our lives from this space, that is the secret to how we show up and what we do. Make sense?
Absolutely. It all this stuff is I geek out about it because I call it the miracle of neuroplasticity because before I was a brain surgery survivor, and at that point in my life, I would have had trouble communicating even basic sentences to you. But drugs, alcohol, brain surgery, brain trauma. And when I started to meditate, it wasn't the meditation in itself, although at times that was blissful. It was my perception after I had meditated for a certain amount of time. And I said, whoa, this stuff really does work. And um, it's we share we share that common sense of how important it is to regulate your nervous system in this day and age, and to take that short, slow breath that you have in your meditations. You say the long, slow, deep, steady breath. You just slow down. You slow down and you feel that, and it really does. It's so powerful. The one last question I had for you is that what does what would you advise the people who are struggling with their past, like a negative self-talk and past story? I'm not worthy, I'm not capable, nobody likes me, things of this nature, and it's all in their story of what they're telling themselves about themselves. And if what would you advise for somebody who's really in that perpetual state of self-hate that often we get into?
You know, Brody, that is it's such a core question. You know, self-loathing is not exclusive to this person or that person. You know,
No.
I think it's, you know, our sense of self, our self-worth, our self-identity, things we were told as kids. You know, every single one of us was told, shut up and sit down,
Mhm.
or sit down and shut up, or go to your room, or this is for adults, or you know, who do you think you are? I mean, there's the list goes on and on. You know that, you know, or shut up, you're an idiot, or getting smacked in the head. I mean, and maybe you know, people who, you know, grew up with like amazing parents who are loving and nourishing and nurturing. Okay, well, not everyone you ever encountered was that way. There
No.
had to be a teacher or a coach or a bully or a person at work or a, you know, someone out there who just said, you're not enough. Sorry, you know, you shouldn't, you know, you're not attractive enough, or you're not smart enough, or, you know, we can go on and on with all
Mhm.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, And so these are, so what did we do? We, you know, in Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, you know, he's got like a section in there called domestication. You know, we all domesticated ourselves, self-domestication. You know, there was a moment in our lives where suddenly it was like, oh, you know what? I'm not going to be as attractive as that person. I need to use this to get by. Or I'm not as smart as that person. Maybe I'll be funny, or I'm not really attractive, smart, or funny. Let me, you know, here's how I'm going to show up. And we made all these, you know, all these compromises to whatever our true nature might have been. And they got reinforced. It's like, hey, no one was mean to me when I did this thing. I'll do that thing more. That's all I was looking for, just for someone not to be mean to me. And I'll
Mhm.
keep doing that. And we got really good at that. And, you know, in those moments, it's like, well, you know, I suck and I'm not worthy of happiness. That's really, you know, where that comes from. Um, I believe that we were all born perfect and whole and pure. And then perhaps a couple of seconds or a couple of weeks or a couple of years later, um, that we conditioned ourselves sort of like away from that. And, you know, that perfection that rests inside of ourselves, you know, we forgot it.
Mhm.
And here we are, you know, a whole bunch of years later. And I think that each of us has the ability to return to the memory of that wholeness and reawaken it in our lives. One of the ways to do that is to, and I know this might seem like, oh my God, really? That's it? One of the ways to do this is to actually cultivate a daily practice. And maybe a daily practice where you just sit with yourself. An important practice that I've taught literally to millions of people, and I would suggest, and it's really, really easy. We have absorbed all this energy every single day, and we've been doing it since we were little kids. We take on stuff, we take them personally, we have regrets, we have grievances, we have shame, we have guilt, we have this self-loathing, like all that stuff over and over, it gets reinforced. So we collect all that stuff, but we don't have a release mechanism. You know, if people are fortunate enough to see a therapist, you know, years afterwards, you know,
Yeah.
maybe they can start working on that. But mostly people end up either, you know, in the throes of addiction, or in a 12-step program, or maybe they're not even in a program, but they realize I'm definitely doing non-nourishing things to distract me, whether that's sex or gambling or drugs or alcohol or
You name
list,
it.
right, list goes on and on. What are we trying to fill? We're trying to fill that sense that we once had, maybe when we were too little to even be able to articulate it or even understand it. Everyone's trying to fill the hole. Everyone's trying to fill that void inside of them. And so I believe that if we can take some time to do this particular practice, I call it the let go meditation. It's just 5 minutes a day, typically in the afternoon, sometime between like 2 and 6, before you have dinner. You just sit down, silently repeat let as you breathe in, silently repeat go as you exhale, and you just sit there and let all that crap come into your awareness. Let that, that abusive situation, let that trauma unfold. Let that thing, that stupid thing you wish you hadn't said, or the thing you wish you had said. Every time it comes into your awareness, don't chase it away, don't do anything with it. Just breathe into it, let go. Now, I do this every day for 30 minutes. But I would say to people, even if you're high achievers, start with 5, lock that in. It's always about consistency, not duration.
Right.
So if we can just get consistency in doing a daily ritualized practice, just like brushing your teeth,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to brush them for an hour a day, but you got to show up every single day,
Yeah.
and brush them. Same thing for a meditation. So
Mm-hmm.
imagine we've been taking in all this weird negative energy, and we have had no catharsis, no release, no whatever. And so I believe if you can introduce that as a practice into your life, that's one thing, a daily practice, and that will cultivate. You do that for 2 days in a row, you're going to feel amazing. You will suddenly feel like, oh my God, I feel so much better just about myself, because all that stuff is just drama. It's not
It
you. It's stuff that either happened to you or stuff you thought, but it's not you right now.
is.
All that stuff is carved in stone. You have the ability to totally shift your life from where you are to where you'd like to be right now. But you got to get that coherence going on. You got to slow the fluctuations of the brain enough so you could listen to the whispers of your heart. And that's tough. And people forget. And people always say, like, oh, I have too many thoughts. I can't do it. It's like everyone can do it. We all have the same amount of thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in that. So even if you're like, no, I have 73,000, you only have 63,000. Believe me, once it gets to that point, it doesn't really matter. So that's an important one. Here's another tool that I want to teach everyone. And the most important aspect of this is, if you use this tool whenever you're about to throw shade on yourself or reach for something that's not necessarily nourishing, I believe this will give you just an extra moment. So I taught this to Marines, and ultimately they developed 25-minute a day practices
Hmm.
built on this thing. So think about something that's been bothering you. Think about something that's been disturbing you, just over the past couple of days. Don't go too deep. This isn't therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And just get clear. Something was supposed to happen. It didn't. Something someone said, irritated you, or, whatever that looks like. And now close your eyes, and through your nose, take a long, slow, deep breath in and watch that breath. And when it gets to your belly, hold it there. Keep holding it and watching it there. Keep witnessing it in your belly. Keep observing it. And now release it. Watch it as it moves up your chest, into your throat, out through your nose or mouth. Keep exhaling. Keep watching it. Keep exhaling that breath out into the ether. Keep watching it as it dissipates into nothingness. And now breathe normally. And when it feels comfortable, open your eyes. That was about 16 seconds. And in those 16 seconds, if you were playing along, and Brody, you were absolutely playing along, and hopefully everybody else, you're playing along. Um, in those 16 seconds, you weren't thinking about that thing that I asked you to think about. And I never told you to stop. I just said close your eyes and watch your breath. So we learned 3 things. One, the most important, you can direct your attention anywhere you want under any situation. Whatever's coming into your awareness, good, bad, whatever, we have the ability to direct ourselves to something else. We've proved that. Number 2, what we did was introduce a pattern interrupt, a break in the action, a time in.
Oh.
essentially, right? Be a space between where our head was, what we were thinking, and right now. It was Viktor Frankl, the Austrian philosopher, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor, who said, in between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space rests our ability to choose. In that choice rests our growth and our freedom.
Mm.
So the third thing that we learned, in addition to the pattern interrupt, is the object of attention, which means anyone can meditate anywhere as long as you have an object of attention. For these purposes, it was just watching our breath as we breathed, held it, released it, and held it again. That was it. 4, 4, 4, 4. Some people call that box breathing. I like 16 seconds because we're watching it the whole time. It's one thing to do the breathing, it's another thing to really watch it. So let's go back to that pattern interrupt. That's how we change our behaviors. That's how we change our thought patterns. If it's 11 o'clock at night and you're going to the freezer, practice 16 seconds in that moment. Introduce the pattern interrupt, the break in the action. If you're just about to scorch the village and say something that you know you'll regret, practice 16 seconds in that moment. I've taught this to cops as they roll up on a scene. So you're not bringing all that heat and energy into a moment where you need the most clarity. So
Right.
when we practice this technique, it introduces the break in the action, the pattern interrupt. And rather than all those hormones and chemicals surging into us, where we're going to say or do something that's really not our best,
Right.
we actually have just a little bit of a break to be a little more thoughtful, a little more mindful, just a little more reflective instead of reflexive. And maybe we'll make a better choice. And so I believe if we can practice this and get really good at it, I would encourage people put a timer on your phone every 2 hours. Just practice 16 seconds. Just break away from that. Introduce a break into whatever you were doing. We need
Mhm.
that. So if we can do that, there's a higher likelihood maybe you'll make 2 or 3 choices on a daily basis that are a little not driven by hormones and chemicals, because that's the opposite would happen when we meditate and when we can take a break in the action. Instead of all those hormones and chemicals that surge into us like fight flight chemicals, the
Mhm.
opposite happens. When we meditate and when we take long slow deep breaths in, we don't perspire. Our skin temperature rises, so that helps our core temperature get low. It's amazing. Um, we also breathe more slowly and more deeply. We also then suppress adrenaline, cortisol, and glucagon, which is like eating 5 Snickers bars at once. We elevate our sex hormones, we
Yep.
elevate our growth hormones, we elevate our immune system. You're looking for something to fight the pandemic because now they don't have anything to actually fight it. They
No.
have things so we don't get as sick. Raise your immune system.
Voila.
Meditation raises your immune system. So like, how do you not do that one? And instead of those platelets getting plump and sticky, your blood begins to get a little bit smoother. So like your heart rate slows, like everything's just from something like a 16-second practice.
Mhm. Brilliant, David. Truly insightful and truly a honor to have you on here. I want to ask you, where can the listeners reach out to you, find you, and what are the best ways to do so?
Well, you can always visit me at davidg.com, davidji.com. On Instagram, I am David G Meditation, one word. Um, on Insight Timer. That's an app that I'm on. Unplug Meditation, that's another app that I'm on. I think I'm the only David G out there. Um, and that came from after I was working at the Chopra Center for a while. David Simon and Deepak Chopra came to me and they said, listen, we have to change your name. There's a problem because every time someone says David, suddenly David Simon whips his head around, but they're not calling for him, they're calling for you. He's being, without another David. They said, we're going to change your name to David G. And I go, what does that mean? And Deepak said, well, J.I. is a term of reverence in Hindi.
Oh,
It
wow.
means it means beloved. And I
Mhm.
said, "Oh my God, my mother named me David because in the Bible that means beloved. I'll be beloved, beloved." And after I started doing that for a couple of weeks, I suddenly realized it may be a little arrogant to have like a capital D. So I changed my capital D to smaller case D.
Ah, okay.
So so that's why I've been David G for the last 20 years, and I own it. Beloved squared or something along those lines, and I have to, earn that every day, to help heal and serve others using whatever I can to make that happen.
Brilliant, David. Namaste, to the inner divine, right? Namaste is I acknowledge your inner divine. So that I learned that recently. So
Well, it doesn't just mean that, Brody. Namaste means I honor your inner divine, which is also in me. And when
oh
you're in
yeah,
that space and I'm in that space, we are one. So it's beautiful, right? It's
beautiful.
acknowledging the beauty in ourselves as well as, in others. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you so much for creating this opportunity for people to really level up their awareness. And I think we transform the world by transforming ourselves. And you are in a magnificent archetype of doing that. So thank you so much, Brody. Namaste.
Namaste.